I'm Giri Prakash from the Federal. Welcome to the Federal series on corporate personalities. We have with us today Mr. Vittal Ramakrishna, a serial entrepreneur, and now the CEO and founder of Pod, a fundraising platform. Welcome to the show, Mr. Vittal Ramakrishna.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let me start by asking you about you have been a serial entrepreneur. I went through your LinkedIn profile, and your first was a small startup, and then it was not funded. That's what you've written. And since then, how's been the journey so far?
It has been definitely a roller coaster ride, like any entrepreneur goes. But I think that is what defines the DNA of being a founder. You know? Only when you are at your lowest point, you always look for the moon and stars.
So what made you become an entrepreneur? I mean, you're an engineer by profession and a complete Bangalorean. So I suppose that was one of the reasons why you launched your startup?
Yes. So I think it was not something by choice, I would say. It was by chance. 2008 is when I finished my engineering.
Okay.
Many people know that year as the Great Recession, which happened globally. So I was one of the fortunate people to come out of college by then. So without getting placed anywhere in the bigger companies like the Infosys and the Wipros, I was left to build something and prove myself that I had to do something on my own. So that is how I started my journey as an entrepreneur. Of course, that terminology back then was also not there. So we were more of building something on our own. So we built a product which eventually got acquired by a large lifestyle company. So that happened after close to 2 years of operations. So I would say my journey began then. And once you understood that freedom was there to build what you wanted, I think that was always stuck with me. So that's how it all started for me.
So since then, how many startups have you launched?
That was my first startup, I would say. The first business which I launched, which got acquired in 2010, early 10. And later on, I started working with KPMG, started traveling across India, later globally, and then moved on to Bosch. So all of this was in the alternative investments and project management space. So once I got good hang of network, which I was able to build across the globe. So I was fortunate enough to travel to around 33 countries. So that happened and built interesting ideas parallelly, not something which was my own, but started supporting entrepreneurs outside. That was when the whole e-commerce segment was also booming. Crowdfunding as a concept was also booming outside of India, especially in the US and the European markets. This was in 2013, 2014. So moved on from my full-time job back then. I was based in Germany 2014. 2011 onwards, I was based in Germany. 2013, I quit my job, became a full-time freelancer supporting various entrepreneurs and their projects. And 2016, I identified a small gap in the European industry for the crowdfunding and pre-selling segment, which was called Crowdpouch, and launched my full-fledged startup, I would say. This was in 2016. So this is something which I did. Later on, 2019 end, this got acquired while I was in Germany. So I would say running a startup has definitely been fun, I would say, without which I would have not learned what to do. So I would say it has given a lot of lessons, not just from a professional standpoint, but also on a personal standpoint. So any challenge thrown to a founder these days, you just take it with a breeze.
You're a veteran now, so I assume. So what is Pod all about? I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Should it be Pod or POD? How would it be?
It is Pod. It is Pod. Pod essentially came up with the aspect where we call it as a pea pod, where there are peas inside the pea pod. So we denote that the peas develop into a fruit which we consume, and that for us is the symbol of a startup, how it
Oh,
develops.
okay.
We are the entire pod. So that is how the idea came. It has a lot of depth in the meaning, but essentially, I think after my exit and I was back to India, I was investing in startups on my own capacity through a lot of referrals which came up, and also a lot of, I would say, angel networks which were growing in India. This was early 2020s, and the pandemic had hit just then.
Okay.
So I was not able to find an organized structure to invest my money, at my own terms. This did not happen. Yeah. So there are several platforms, larger platforms in India, which has a defined commitment to be paid. You have to commit yourself for 3 years with a fixed amount. You have to, invest that amount. If not, there are penalty charges. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to invest at my own will and in the deal which I wanted. That freedom was not there.
Okay.
So since I was accustomed to building products and processes, productifying the process, we thought there are many people like me, and whomever with whom I was speaking had got used to this previous process. And so they said, you know what, if there is something where we would be able to help Indian startups and come on board, because an angel investor is not somebody who just puts money. Right? They also, if for example, somebody specializes in marketing, they want to help the brands in which they invest in. So they wanted to get involved in the Indian story of startup, which has picked up from the last 3 years. And this was the genesis of what I would say, to build out a small platform to bring in both the investors and startups to understand. And these investors for the first time were not the HNIs, were not the super ultra people. So we brought down the asset class to normal people who were working as managers, even normal engineers or other professional people working in corporate who could contribute essentially to startup ecosystem, which is growing day to day. So that was something which so this gave birth to a lot of aspects. New jobs came into place. People were able to switch jobs being an investor in those startups too. Because they found that, wow, this is the idea which I thought of several years ago. I find the same idea somebody who's already doing it. Now I would like to put some money and also get involved. So I would say this is how it all started for us.
Okay. So this crowdfunding platform, so what is the least amount somebody can invest?
So see, crowdfunding is itself a very big terminology. That is when you bring a lot of people into place. We don't have that kind of a magnitude in India, because we also have to work well within the frameworks of the SEBI and also essentially the laws of the country. So India currently does not allow people to invest, in a capacity of more than 200 people per startup. So we have to work well within that. But crowdfunding as a concept is where you bring in hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people.
So, which is why we go on to say that Pod is not an entirely crowdfunding platform, but it is a curated investment platform. That is something which and people can start with as low as 20,000 rupees for a different instrument, but these terms are defined by the startup themselves. Because we support startups who are super early stages. Essentially, these are coming from people who are looking to raise 25 to 50 lakhs. Their first checks to build out their company to the next stage. They maybe have a patent already for their product, or they already have some traction with paying customers. They have to take it from 0 to 1. So this is where we come in as a platform. Many people put in 5 lakhs. Many people also put in 15 lakhs, 20 lakhs at one go also, if they really like the idea. So it starts from 20,000. Some people put 1 lakh first. They understand how the founders work. Then they say, hey, you know what, these guys are doing really amazing. They come up with the next check has been 50 lakhs directly from them. That has also happened. So,
Okay. That's interesting. I'll come back to this later, but perhaps the most important issue, and I would want to talk to you about the collapse of SVB. I mean, it's like I'm jumping from this to that, but this is something that I wanted to ask you initially itself.
something which we have been closely watching from the last, I would say, 1.5 weeks precisely. I've got a lot of friends in US as well, who are also worried. A lot of funds essentially had deposited their funds with SVB. So this has happened. And overnight, when this happened, people were not able to withdraw funds. So that was something which was there. I would say there is going to be a lot more stringent policies which is going to come in. But the crash was something which was not entirely expected from the ecosystem standpoint. But if you see some of the reports which also state, KPMG had audited 14 days back and given them a clean chit. So before this. So now people are going back to audit KPMG itself. It's come back to that side. And I am one of the person who is coming from KPMG background. So I was also like, what's happening? So this is something which is there. But there were Y Combinator startups from India. I think around 16 startups from India who had also deposited their money with SVB. Something happened. And they've got back all their deposits. Fortunately, the government came with certain measures. There was also an outroar just before the government came with a decision. All of this in a span of 72 hours. Remember this. Outroar in the public that government may bail out SVB with taxpayers' money. So the taxpayers came out and said, why are you trying to bail out with our money? This is not common people's money. This is VC, venture capital. And other funds which are coming from higher middle class people. This was the parity which came up from the audience. So I think government definitely handled it well. And they did bring in measures so that any such things would not impact the startup ecosystem. If this deposits didn't come, it would have impacted a lot of industries, not just in US. Many ecosystem players outside US also depend on the VCs in US. So you have the Secovas, whatnot, A16Z, all these big funds actually put their money in SVB. They have multiple banks, but these are big amounts, what we are talking, in billions of dollars. So I think the effect was seen, but I was really happy that India is currently at a state, as in wherever things are happening outside India on a negative way, with the FTX crash, which happened with the cryptos, So with all of these still happening, India is becoming more and more immune to these things. That is the biggest positive sign I think I am seeing in the Indian ecosystem as compared to other parts of the world, which are still feeling the impact of the SVB crash.
That is true. In fact, several years ago, when quite a few South Asian banks failed, we are the only country which a robust banking system sort of held up. So I suppose the same narrative.
We also see the new one, which is the Credit Suisse, which is from the Switzerland. So that is also something which is going through a rough weather. So I think it is very important to look inward. That is something which is there.
Yeah, that's true. But what are the kind of lessons that that one learns from it? What I found out was that most of these startups have their registered office in, say, in US, and they are incorporated in the US, and they park their funds in banks like this, so that they, first of all, they get an international exposure. Number two, they have an address which says it's out of US. But do you really think now, in hindsight, it shouldn't have happened? Given the fact that India has a very good, robust startup culture, and there are banks which actually, you're able to park your funds here in any of these banks, and the possibility of a collapse of an Indian bank is very less, because the government always rescues. If you could look at Yes Bank, for example.
For sure. I think the state which it was 5 years ago, that is definitely changing for us. Many people immediately, the first thing when you were a venture-backed company in India was they used to immediately go and incorporate outside India. Be it US, be it Singapore, Mauritius, Dubai for that matter. right?
Yeah.
The intention was there would be free flow of compliance related money from their VCs or investors directly to their bank account. It was all about fetching funds from outside of India. And till date, also majority of the funds are not in India. It is still outside of India.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that is still there. But I see a lot of things happening where Indian startups many are coming back to India as well. They're incorporated in Singapore, but they're coming back to India. So those things are happening, but at a slow pace. But nonetheless, there is a directional change essentially from the ecosystem standpoint where these startups are understanding that, okay, looking at things how it's happening globally, they're looking at, okay, India is a much safer option. Although the processes are lengthier, they still feel this is a much safer option these days. These are the discussions which are exactly happening in the ecosystem now.
Oh, okay.
These days when we are people complaining about RBI, now suddenly feel, okay, if there was an RBI kind of measure, things would have not happened, maybe, right? So this is why we believe that RBI now is, okay, we understand why it is stringent. They don't give away bank licenses directly to banks. It's not so easy.
Yeah.
Now we are understanding that. So I think this is the talk which is happening today in the market. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is about, of course, the Tamil Nadu government introducing the equity model for startups, and then just want to know how does it sort of first of all, can you please explain what exactly is this kind of model and how will it actually change the scenario for startups?
See, I think we have in Karnataka also something called as an Elevate program. Every state government has understood that startups are somebody who is going to create a lot of jobs, and this automatically becomes one of the manifestos for the government also, because job providing is one of the key aspects of any government. So they understood that a lot of tipping points for the corporates have been reached, and early stage startups are the one who employ quickly, even if the numbers are 20, 30 or 50 for that matter. But these startups are itself hundreds in numbers. So what I've understood is a lot of innovation is also coming. Innovation will then lead to essentially bringing in foreign investors through FDI who are going to be larger players. For example, if somebody is doing a small patented product in automotive industry, this is going to bring in the Siemens, Mercedes, or the Daimlers, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it is all about attracting more and more investments into the state, which adds into the development, employment, and essentially it's a win-win for all of us. So this is why the whole model of they are telling that we will create a pool of funds so that their startups can take them as equity. Why? Because they can also get something back later on. Karnataka government has something similar, but they're more of the essence of grants, So grants are something where you just give away, but the process of getting a grant is itself painful, and you also don't know where the grants are being used for. But equity is a mechanism where you have and can piggyback on that startup for a long time. That is something which there, at least to get an update on what's happening on the ground. So I think it's definitely a good move, something which we had also proposed with other governments too. So Tamil Nadu government coming up with this is really a big boost for a lot of startups there. So there are several small hubs which are opening up in Coimbatore from the startup world. And a lot of IT has moved also from Bangalore and Mysore to Coimbatore. That is also something which has moved. So I see that they are looking at this as a potential. And but overall, you see from an Indian standpoint, I think one of the best times to be in, with the government stepping in from the startup world. And we had a lot of things, especially from Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman this year for the budget as well, from the startup standpoint. So I think it is definitely going to be golden years for all the founders who are coming in with the right ideas.
So does it mean that the Tamil Nadu government will pick up an equity stake in these startups?
So government cannot do that, but they would be preparing smaller vehicles. So that is something which they are going to
SPVs kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it may be an SPV, but it could also mean several organizations which will be there. I am also not sure how much a government can get involved in a for-profit organization. That is something which is not allowed usually. So we'll have to look into those aspects. But they've just announced that recently, and I think Kerala also is going to follow the same model soon.
For example, Titan, Tamil Nadu government has a stake in Titan. And if you look at the airports, like the Bangalore International Airport, the government of Karnataka has a stake through another agency, of course. But this is on a much larger scale, and I assume that's also mandatory. But as per Airport Authority of India, but this is on a smaller scale. So you expect that there will be specific SPVs. There could be smaller organizations which pick up stake, but there will be a link with the government.
They might be more like a reporting arm to the government to understand how the progress is. So there will be some small committees which are being set up by the government to understand how the ecosystem works. There's nothing like how incubation works from the government side, right? Government allocates certain funds to every incubator in their state, also from the center. It ranges in a couple of crores. So they allocate it, they have to function for the next couple of years. So instead of doing that directly, they're adding one more point to the incubated startups as well, telling these are graduating, but they also need investments for further growth and development. So for that, we are going to add on this, where maybe the incubator themselves would be able to take equity there. So that is also one of the mechanisms which they could do.
So you assume there is more skin in the game rather than for grants. And grants are actually it's much tougher to get it. But I assume the principles of investing in a company remains the same, even for a model like what Tamil Nadu government has, right?
That's correct. So investing would then become much more serious for that matter. I think there would be more pedigree of founders who would look at quality of the deliverables rather than the whole mindset of let's get the grant. And this free money. That is going to go up. Because now you have somebody who's coming literally on your board or your cap table, which is another game altogether.
Let me get back to the scenario of investments from VCs and from angel funds, PE funds, and stuff like that. Are there any new trends that you're seeing in India? That's one part of the question. The other part of the question is the fact that do you think that after a bit of a lull when it came to investments, it's again picked up during the last couple of months?
Yeah. So I will combine both the things into one. There are a lot of people who have been investing earlier, through friends and family. So if somebody from your relatives come and say, you know what, I'm doing this, so they would first reach out to the family members and friends. They would pool in money and start investing. Now, what has happened is with a lot of things taking main stage, such as Shark Tank in India, a program, right, which is showcasing some of the best startups with good stories. Shark Tank has become household. All the grandmothers and grandfathers are asking, why are you not going there? This was not the case 5 years back. They would ask, what are you actually doing? Why don't you go into Wipro or Infosys? So that whole mindset has changed. People are looking at startup as one of the mainstream employment aspects. That is something which is there. And essentially, a lot of investors are also coming to pick in startups at a very early stage. The earlier they find out that this is going to be a very good potential startup for growth, for them, they're actually betting on it's something where you're trying to bet on a jockey very early on, right? And you always bet on the jockey, not on the horse. It is something like that always. So for them, instead of investing, let's consider 50 lakhs in one startup before, now they are able to diversify that into 5 startups with 10 lakhs each. And the success ratio of startup is also low because it's a high risk, high reward. Not every startup is successful. like only 3% of the startups go on to next stage of funding also. So that helps them diversify. Many people are coming out in the open talking of investing in startups, which itself is a big thing. And many alumni networks are being formed. If for example, you are from Bangalore, right? So, so RV College of Engineering. So RV College of Engineering now has its own alumni network who are now supporting founders from RV College of Engineering pass outs to come in and pool in money for themselves. So such kind of trends have started picking up across the nation among many universities. And I believe universities are going to be key in driving a lot of entrepreneurs and R&D for the country. That is something which I definitely see. And I think, this is how it is typically going to be. I missed the second part of the question. I just forgot. What was that?
The second part of the question was related to whether there was a bit of a lull when it came to investments from VCs, angel funds, PE funds. But has that again picked up during the last couple of months?
So it has. I would say there was this whole aura of people would quote whatever valuation they wanted. People with plain idea, with actually no pedigree in building things would pick up big investments earlier. But all of that has actually changed in the last 12 months. Investors are also focusing on unit metrics of the startup. Trying to understand if these startups and founders understand what they're doing or not. There has been, I would say, a couple of filters added, but there has been no stop in funding. So there are much more stringent filters added to the funding ecosystem, which is good for both sides of the story, essentially. And early stage investments has picked up, I would say. That is something which has picked up. The sentiment is more at the very early stages, but there was definitely 30 to 35% drop in funding as compared to previous years. But that is also primarily because of the market economics globally. So all of that shift, it has to adjust essentially. But this is not a dip which is going to last for long. Things have started improving already. So that is something which is there. And more retail investors who are coming on board are filling those gaps as well. I think 2021, 22 saw the biggest influx of retail investors across all asset classes. That is filling the early stage of the startup. So something which we also focus on. Later stage definitely depends on how these performing.
As far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, are there any? Have they just launched it, or they have already started getting some kind of traction there?
No, traction is still too early. There are some they have launched, of course. I don't know the intricate details yet, but definitely that is something which you'll only be able to see after 6 months. So once the program is full-fledgedly launched, that is something which is.
Have you suggested something to the Karnataka government? Have you been speaking to them? And
so we are definitely in talks with the Elevate team as well in Karnataka, which looks at idea stage and POC stage of startups. So government has also come up with their own initiatives. There's one aspect of grant, and if there is a POC which the Karnataka government also will support, they also will come up, but they also have a pool of funds. Fund of funds is something which they're doing. What Tamil Nadu government has done is that of magnitude, a much bigger magnitude. So this is something which, for sure, there are in talks in the Karnataka government and other governments as well as we speak. So that is something which they're coming up because the center is allocating certain funds. That is also something which for the development of such startup ecosystems across the country. And country also has a lot of clusters within. And Karnataka is a big cluster. Tamil Nadu is a bigger cluster. When you look at from an industry standpoint. So that is something which they are targeted, and definitely they'll be implementing a lot more measures this year across many states.
Let me come back to the first issue that we discussed about SVB. Do you think the Indian government should have a bank similar to SVB with a lot of checks and balances, of course, where it is dedicated to startups instead of several banks, private sector and public sector, having smaller, they have their own smaller divisions for startups, all that. Do you think one consolidated bank which actually takes care of all this, SVB kind of model, but obviously with a lot more checks?
Understood. See, there is no definitive answer to that for sure. But the way SBI has come up with their startup bank, ICICI has come up with that. I'm sure many other banks also will be following. S Bank is startup friendly, So with all these things in place, we also saw a recent collaboration with, I think, Google HSBC, HSBC startups. So with the traditional bank itself opening up smaller divisions, I definitely see that the risk is minimalized because you're banking on already trusted factors. Got it. So I would say the risk is minimum to begin with, but a dedicated bank for startups, I think, would also not serve an entirely large purpose, is something which I believe is still super early stage for us to think on those lines. But existing banks, if they are open for a lot of credit lines for startups, especially debt and other alternative funding options too, I'm sure it is going to be very lucrative for startups to catch on to them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ramakrishna. Thanks for taking time off to talk to the Federal. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.